don't know why YouTube is being super weird lately and not letting me stay connected. It's very strange. Okay. Hopefully it'll work this time. Let's see. Okay, now it looks like I'm actually live. It was really weird. Let me pop out my chat. Okay. There's someone. Okay, hey Cameron. Hey Sindra. Yeah, sorry about that. I don't know why it never wants me to stay connected at first. Hopefully we're good now. As I lost you guys for a minute. Okay, let's see. Let me make these comments a little bigger. All right, so I would love to start out and find out if any of you guys have sold at craft shows before. I feel like that would be a good starting place. Hello, Dana. I know Dana has been to some craft shows. I've seen her booth setups. So yes, let me know if you guys have done craft shows. If you have not, if you have thought about it, if you have things that are holding you back from attending your first craft show, I would love to know what those are. I also wanted to do a quick check of the Facebook group. If you guys aren't in the Facebook group, be sure to join so that we can chat about more things. But I'm going to double check and make sure I didn't get any questions when I posted this in the Facebook group. So let's double check. Okay, so little background. The main reason that I felt comfortable talking about craft shows, I did do craft shows pretty solid for about 2 years. And that was, I would book my schedule out. I would start my craft shows at the end of October when it actually started getting cold. I only sold cold weather stuff at my craft shows. I did one summer show, and actually the thumbnail that I used for this video is a photo of me doing the one summer show that I did. And it wasn't a complete failure, but I was still trying to figure out what I wanted to sell at shows. I actually tried to bring some crop tops to that show. So there were some different things that I was selling outside of what I normally sold. And for me, most of the crop tops that I brought to that show, I did sell a few, but most of them ended up getting sold on major clearance in my Etsy shop because it was just very difficult to get people to pay what I felt that they were worth in person. And by the time I was ready to just get rid of them, I was selling them for like $15 a pop, which is awful, but I couldn't get rid of them and I needed to get rid of them. So I decided to stick with fall and winter shows because people have Christmas on the brain. They're more likely to spend. I felt like my chunkier makes, like my hats and my scarves and all of that, were so much faster to make. I could build up inventory more quickly and be ready for those shows. So for me, the fall and winter shows were the fit. And that's a big thing that I wanted to focus on today, is whether or not the craft shows are the right fit for you, for your business, for what you're creating, because it does depend. There were shows like the summer show, even shows in the fall and winter that I chose not to do again. I tried them to see if they would be the right fit, but they weren't always a good fit. And you have to keep that in mind. It also means that if you don't do very well at your first show or your first few shows, it doesn't mean that craft shows aren't right for you. It just means that those shows that you tried may not be right for you. So that's really where the focus is today. All right, I just got the Facebook pulled up. Let me make sure that I don't have any questions from anyone. Okay, I don't think I do. Perfect. All right, so we have got, let's see, Amaris is here. Hello. So Dana has definitely sold at craft shows before. Cindra said that she did one at work. And Cameron said, I have done craft shows before, but not selling crochet. Gotcha. All right. So here are some of the things. Like I said, I did take some notes, so we're going to go through these. I think this will be great, especially if people are watching this as a replay and are just looking for some advice as well on whether or not they should take the plunge and try their first craft show. So my first craft show, I'm pretty sure this was my very first craft show. I chose to do a craft show at a local coffee shop. It actually wasn't even local looking back. So I lived south of Atlanta, and this first show that I did was actually north of Atlanta. So I had a bit of a drive. I mean, it was probably an hour or so for me to drive there. But I think that I think that I only had to bring a table. I didn't have to have a tent, so that was a big thing, and we'll talk about that too, of what's required for the show. So I needed to get a table, and I think it was only like $25 or $30. So that was the other big piece. And I think that they said they were going to have like live music. So I was like, this will be nice. Even if I have a crappy show, I can listen to the music. It's a coffee shop, so I can have some coffee, so I figured it would just be a good experience. I could connect with some other makers. That was a big goal of mine. And I remember I do have a picture from that show, and I need to see if I can find it, because the way that I set things up, I was pretty organized, but you could tell it was one of my very first shows. I'm pretty sure I forgot my tablecloth. So it was just, this hot mess in a way, but you have to put yourself out there. And I felt like that was fine. It didn't have to be perfect, the first show that I went to. And again, I chose a show that wasn't super strict. So it's not like they said, oh, you forgot this, or, your table doesn't look a certain way, so you're not gonna be able to come back next year. I actually attended that show 3 years in a row, and it ended up being on some years, one of my best shows. So that's something to think about. And here are the questions that I feel like you should really ask yourself when you're thinking about doing craft shows, especially regularly. So if you're considering having this as a main source of income, if you want to start doing craft shows multiple times a month, these are some of the questions you can ask yourself. So the first one is, are you a people person? So this is interesting because you can do craft shows if you're not a people person, but it's going to be difficult. It's going to be one of those situations where you kind of have to force yourself to come out of the box. You're going to need to try to get yourself into a people person mood before you go to the show, which isn't always possible. Sometimes we wake up and we're just not in the mood to deal with other people if you are an introvert. So this also is important in choosing the right shows for you. And we'll talk about that more too. But you're going to be more successful at your craft shows if you're willing to talk to people. It's very difficult to be super successful if you just sit in the corner and ignore people. Now, you don't want to badger people. It's, I was reading this morning a little bit about being successful at craft shows, and they said, keep in mind, you don't want to be a used car salesman. You don't want to badger people to buy your stuff. You want them to feel like they've got space, but you want to be open and engaging to where they feel you want to feel approachable, so that if they do have a question, if they do seem interested, that they feel like they can talk to you. Be willing to open up a conversation. And what I usually like to say is focus on your work, not yourself, because I think a lot of times we tend to get a little self-conscious when we're talking about ourselves. But if you make it about the work and about what you have and the products, it makes it easier. So a lot of times, one of the biggest questions I would get that was actually a really great opener, there were 2 or 3 things, but one of them was, did you make all of this yourself? And so that would be a place where it's easy. I was like, yeah, I work throughout the year to get everything ready. And you can kind of talk about your process a little bit. You can open that up to talk about the yarn that you use, and about the specific products. Like for me, I worked really hard to cater my designs to be items that fit a wide range of people that were super comfortable, and you can talk about all those key points, like this is why I brought these things. Another thing people would say, all this stuff is so soft, and I was like, yeah, isn't that crazy? There's actually wool in that yarn, but it's so soft and comfortable. It's the perfect mix of, wool and acrylic so that it's warm, but it's not scratchy. I had all of these things that I repeated a lot of things at craft shows, but nobody's going to know that because it's a different person that comes in every time. So the longer you go to craft shows and the more people you talk to about your stuff, it becomes a lot easier to have those same conversations, but people feel connected. I would bring stuff to work on too, so that I didn't feel like I was just sitting there waiting to talk to someone. I would be working on something, but I would make eye contact. For me, it's always been pretty easy to read people, so I can kind of tell whether someone wants to be left alone or whether they're interested in actually having a conversation. So that's helpful as well. So that's the big thing is, are you a people person or not? It's not impossible to do craft shows as someone who's very introverted, but you have to take other steps to try to make sure that you're comfortable at the show, and that you're not just going to clam up and be extremely uncomfortable the entire time. So the next question is, can you make enough inventory? So if you start with a smaller show, then it's not as important, but you do need some options. And I think as long as you feel like you are going to have the ability to pick a few products. So for me, I would pick anywhere from 5 to 10 main items that I was going to make. And then I would make each of those items in a few different colors or a few different sizes. So that way you don't overwhelm yourself with making a million different products. Like, I'm going to make water balloons and bees and hats and scarves and bags and cardigans and wraps. Like, you're going to overwhelm yourself really fast. So I like to do a sliding scale where I start with my smaller items. So my smallest item at craft shows was always my coffee cats and my beer cats, my little cat koozies. And I would try to make anywhere from 25 to 50 of those for a show, but I could work on those year round, and I would just stock them up and then they'd be ready when I started show season. Then it would move up to my next size item, which was headbands and fingerless gloves. Those were very similar. It took a little bit more time for the fingerless gloves, but I would try to make anywhere from 15 to 20 of each of those items. And then we would move into hats. Now, hats tended to be one of my most popular items. So I did usually try to make anywhere from 25 to 30 different pom-pom hats. So a little more than the headbands and the gloves, but that's because I knew it was a super popular item. And the longer you go to shows, you'll figure out which items tend to be popular no matter what show you're at, the staple items. And then I would move into scarves. So for scarves, I would have infinity scarves and cowl scarves. Those are the only two options for scarves. And I would try to make 10 to 15 of each. So 10 to 15 infinity scarves, 10 to 15 cowls in different colors. And then I would have some larger items like wraps or bags or even cardigans, but I would only bring 3 or 4. So those were the big ticket items. I didn't pressure myself to make a ton, but that's the sliding scale. So I had more of the items that were on the lower price range, and I had lots of options for them to go through, because people do like options, but it's more of along the lines of options for color. Like, oh, I love this hat, but which color should I get? Do I wear neutrals more? Do I wear colors more? And they have a lot of options to choose from. And the same thing with the little coffee cats. So people would look for coffee cats that, matched their cat or were someone's favorite colors. And I would have these, bins where people could just flip through, and packaging matters. I'll show you really quick. I don't want to get too off the rails, but so this is how I would package them. And then they would sit in these little bins and people could like flip through them, to see what colors they wanted. So that was really cool. So the question is whether or not you feel you can make enough inventory for going to your first show. Because most people don't have that problem. I feel like a lot of people do make a lot of things. So you can just bring what you have, but it is a question of making sure that you cater it a little bit, because you don't want your booth to just be all over the place and people come in and be like, I don't even know where to start. You know what I mean? So even if it's like, if you have a focus on amigurumi, I know Dana does a lot of amigurumi. She's here on the live today, and having a lot of different options. But again, having a sliding scale. I know she makes these really cute little amigurumi frogs that are small. So you can make a bunch of the little small items. And as you move up, you can have a larger item where you make a few, a few less of those, a few less of the even larger items, but make, if you make bees in different sizes, or if you make, the frogs, make them in different colors. So you have these options for people to feel like they have choices, but they don't feel overwhelmed because you aren't throwing every single product that could ever be crocheted in their face at once. So that's a big thing to think about if you're considering craft shows. So let me see. I want to make sure I haven't missed anything. Jacqueline's here. Hello, Jacqueline. Jamie's here too. I really want to do craft fairs, but I don't drive and I have to coerce people to help me with them. Okay, so we can talk about that as well. Thornwing is here. Hello. Yes, and I agree on cohesive concepts. So finding items that kind of go together in one way or another, with a few other things sprinkled in there, especially if you want to test the waters, which craft shows are a great place to bring new items and see if people have any kind of emotional reaction, if they think they're cool, if they purchase them. And that can give you an idea of, whether or not that might be a winner at your next craft show. Hello, Dawn. Hello. Okay, so more questions to ask yourself. Do you have what you need for the craft show that you're interested in, or will you incur upfront expenses outside of the craft show fee? So this goes with the research. So one of the things that you're going to have to do when you start looking into craft shows is research. You're going to want to see what's even available in your area. And there's a lot of ways to do this, and we can talk a little bit about that now. So when I first started looking into craft shows, there are the big websites that you can go to, like festivalnet.com. I think that's what it's called. I put them in the description. There's two like large databases that you can go to online that have listings of local shows, especially the larger shows. But some of the other things that you can do is look at local churches, especially if you're rural and you want to start small. So I had a few church shows that I did that were very local because I was south of Atlanta. And if I wanted to do something that wasn't going to be an hour-long drive, most of the time that was going to be at a church. So you can look at local churches, especially the big ones. If you have big local churches, you can look into those for like their big holiday sales, which can be really, really good. You can look at schools. Surprisingly, there are a lot of schools now that will do them kind of as a fundraiser. They'll do craft shows and holiday shows, which can be very good. You can just search in Google craft shows in and put your city and just see what pops up. One of the other things you can do too is see if your city, or if you have a larger city that's in close proximity. So for me, I live in Alabama, but I don't live in the city of Birmingham. I live outside the city of Birmingham. So I would probably search for craft shows in Birmingham, Alabama, or sometimes you might want to look in the more affluent areas. So we have some cities around Birmingham that are known for people have a little more money to spend. So it might be worth my while to look into craft shows in those cities, even if it means a little more of a drive, because it means I may be able to price my stuff at more of a price point that I'll feel confident that I'm getting what it's worth. And if the people there have more money to spend, then you can look into those cities. So Googling specific cities and seeing what's available, craft shows, art fairs, using those keywords and just taking a lot of notes. I had a whole Excel sheet full of ideas and craft shows and, places that, I wanted to look into more. And then I would slowly cross those off the list if, as I honed in on the shows that I really wanted to try out. If you have questions, you can always try to find a contact. to see, you know, if you don't see something, maybe if you don't see the show fee, or if you have questions about the show. I used to have to reach out to say, hey, I don't have a tent. And if I didn't see whether a tent was required or not, I would contact them, because, you know, you don't want to get in a situation where that was one thing that I didn't buy until my second year of craft shows. So I specifically could only go to shows that didn't require you to bring your own tent, because some of them do. So that goes back to, do you have what you need, or are you going to incur expenses? So as you're researching craft shows, you want to find out exactly what you actually need. Are you going to have to bring a table? Are you going to have to bring a chair? Are you going to have to bring a tablecloth? Are you going to have items on your table to actually display your stuff, or will you be able to just lay it all out on the table? Are you going to have to buy things to transport your stuff, or do you have enough Tupperware to move things on your own? Let's see. Those were the main things, I think. So those were the big items: is tent, table, chairs, tablecloth. And there's ways you can save money. You know, I think I got it started with a 6-foot table, which was fairly inexpensive, and it's folds up so it fit in my car. That's the other thing. You have to make sure that all of your stuff will fit in your car. And then I found my tent, I think at Ollie's one year, or no, Aldi. I found it at Aldi, and I got a blue one, which some shows require you to have white fireproof tents. So there were some shows that I never went to because I never bought the big crazy tent, you know, for those big like art shows. But looking into, you know, going and reading like what's required of vendors, and then also, of course, looking at the fee to really see like, okay, how much am I actually going to have to invest to go to my first show? And like I said, for my very first show at that coffee shop, I did have to buy a table. But I'm pretty sure that's it. I might have gone and bought a tablecloth. Again, I can't remember if I forgot my tablecloth or not. I may have gotten one and brought it. But you can find tablecloths at a lot of different places, unless they require, again, look at what they require, because they may require a black tablecloth, which in that case, you can just buy black twin bed sheets. Done that before. That was a money saver. Or if you just can't find a black tablecloth and you don't want to buy one specifically for craft shows, because if you do that, they're going to be expensive because they know that you need it. So bed sheets can be a good option. Okay. Are there shows in your area or in driving distance? So that's the other big question. And that's where the research comes in, is, are there even options where you live for craft shows? Another thing that you can look into are art and maker Facebook groups for your area or a local area. So I felt very lucky that in Atlanta, there was a Facebook group in Atlanta that was started by some of these people in the show circuit who would go to all of these different pop-up events and shows and art. And it's another thing is to know some of the lingo, because it may be called a craft show, maybe called a craft fair, maybe called an art fair, maybe called a pop-up shop, pop-up event, handmade pop-up show. All of these keywords, you can input them and see if other options come up in your area. You can also search Facebook events. That's another thing. A lot of people will create Facebook events for things, and you won't actually find it anywhere else online. And Eventbrite. So the website Eventbrite. So I need to add Eventbrite to the description of this video as well. But you can search Eventbrite, and you can look for Facebook groups. So our Facebook group is, well, the one that I was a part of in Atlanta was called Pop-Up Posse Atlanta. And it was literally a Facebook group where all of the makers in the Atlanta area who were a part of the Facebook group, and there were probably 2,000 people in that Facebook group, would share shows. Anytime they heard of a new show, they would share it in the Facebook group. They would share advice on shows. So if there were big shows, if someone came into the Facebook group and said, hey, I'm considering going to this show, I see that it's been happening for a long time. Has anyone been a vendor? What was your experience? They would share their experience. They would sell craft show items. So when people would upgrade. So for instance, if I had decided to upgrade to a fireproof white tint to go to these, more expensive shows, or the larger shows, I could sell my old blue tint on that Facebook group. So it was just a really supportive place for makers. And hey, if there's not one, you could start one. So that's a really good option. So let's see. Dana says, I always try to have a variety and multiple colors too. Also try to have variety in my prices. And that's what I meant by smaller items to larger items. So my smallest items were $20 and $25. Now that was in Atlanta when people would pay those prices. Sometimes if I went to more rural shows where I knew that my prices may not go over as well, I would lower them a little. So my lowest price items would be more like 10 to 15 instead of 20 to 25. So I did have some adjustment room in my costs, and if the show costs less. So those shows in Atlanta could be upwards of $300 to go to the show, whereas a show at a local church could be like $20 or $25. So, for me, sometimes it was more about the experience, making those connections. So I was okay with lowering my prices a little bit for that. But my lowest prices would be 10 to 15 or 20 to 25. My highest price items were over 100. So like my big items like my shawls or my bags or cardigans, if I brought any of that kind of stuff where I only had 3 or 4 of them, they would be 100 plus for those bigger items. And everything else in the middle was a sliding scale. And for me, it actually was. So it was 20 to 25 for the coffee and beer cats, 30, and I think it was 25 for the headbands too, 30 for the fingerless gloves, 35 for the hats, 45 for the scarves, and that may have been the highest, because then I think it jumped up to the 115 or something like that for the wrap. So it really was a nice slide there. I would offer discounts if people were purchasing multiple items. So that was another thing that I could do to help. Emma's here. Hello, hello, hello. Emma says, I'm so glad you're covering this topic. I've been looking into selling amigurumis. Yes. And that's so definitely connect with Dana. Dana, who's on here, you guys should connect, because she does shows right now and sells amigurumi. So she might have some really good specific help for you. Some of the things that she's learned along the way selling amigurumi at shows. Let's see. Okay. Sindra says, we have one in Idaho called Art in the Park. Yes, that is another one that people use. So Art in the Park, art walks, things like that. That's fantastic. Hello, IVB Creates. Welcome. We are talking about whether or not to craft show. Okay. So that was my last question. So those were the big 4 questions, the starter questions that I had, which was, are you a people person? Can you make enough inventory for a craft show? Do you have what you need? Are you going to incur expenses outside of just the show fee? Are there shows in your area or within driving distance? So those are the 4 big questions that I kind of would start with, just to kind of get your feet wet and figure out, okay, is this really something that I want to try? Now, these are some of the key points that I have advice for if you're just starting out, if you're on the fence. The first one would, of course, be to start small. If at all possible, start small. Find a local show that's not going to cost you a ton of money, that's not going to require you to buy a bunch of stuff, and just try it. I mean, and that's my big thing. If you're on the fence, I would go ahead and do it, because the only downside is that maybe you won't sell a ton of stuff, but there are a lot of upsides to it. You're going to make connections, not just with potential customers, but with other people in your community who are in the maker space. And that is where you get the opportunity to make those connections where people say, oh, well, I know a show that actually, I've done a lot better at. This is the information. And you start to make these connections to where you realize, oh, there's other shows that people know about because they're in the circuit already. That's a really great way to discovering more local opportunities for yourself, and maybe even putting your stuff in stores, which is a whole nother thing that we can have a chat about, because that was something that I did as well when I was doing the show circuits. I was also doing commission and wholesale in some of the local handmade stores in my area. So start small and start local. And this is big. So who was it? Jamie. So I think that going super local is obviously going to be the easiest to have someone willing to help if you're not able to drive yourself. So I think that that's finding super local events that maybe aren't as long. That's another thing too. So look at the timing of the event, because it's a lot easier for you to get someone to help you at an event if you say the event's only 3 or 4 hours versus it's an 8-hour show that they're going to have to either hang around or come back and pick you up. Another thing is to offer them a percentage payment, because it's very difficult to say, I'll pay you this exact amount of money to come help me with this show, because you don't know how much you're going to make. But if you say, look, I'll pay you 10% of my earnings if you want to come and hang out. Obviously, if they, especially if they don't have to help you at the booth either. So if you just need transport help, so like I just need you to get me to the show and get me home. If you want to hang out, great. You can just hang out at the show, go walk around, do some shopping, enjoy the show as an attendee, as long as you're willing to help me get my stuff there and pack my stuff up. And I will pay you a percentage of what I make at the show to help me with those things. I think that would be helpful. And that feels more fair than saying like, I'll pay you $30, but then you don't know how much you're going to make at the show. So I think the percentage is super helpful. So going to the show as an attendee first, this really goes back to this idea of, are you a people person or not? That's a tough question because it depends on the people, right? So most of the time when we find our people, the people that make us feel comfortable, that we feel like we can be ourselves, we don't feel like anyone is judging us in a certain way, that really can depend on the show. So unless you're a chameleon, which some people are, I feel like that was a kind of a little bit of a superpower that I felt like I sometimes had if I was in the right mood, that I could kind of blend in and it didn't really matter who was at the show. I could mirror and emotionally still be able to connect and talk with people, even if I'm like, man, these really aren't my people, but this is a great show. They're here to spend money. They want to buy my stuff. So I'm going to kind of be a chameleon, and change into whatever I need to be to have those conversations. But not everybody can do that. It can be very uncomfortable. And so going to the show that you're interested in first as an attendee, walking around, meeting the vendors, even talking to the vendors. So you can take that opportunity, not if they're busy. You make sure that if the booth is quiet, you don't want to take up too much of their time. But going up to those vendors and say, yeah, I'm really interested in actually coming here as a vendor next year. What has your experience been like? Fantastic way to get intel and figure out if that's the type of show that you might actually really want to be a part of. So the comments are going. Emma and Dana got you to making a connection. That's fantastic. Thank you. Cameron, what type of products do you recommend for craft shows? I'm struggling to come up with products that will hit the more accessible price points. Even the small items I make take several hours. Okay, I did put some resources in the description of this video that I think will be super helpful for you. The first one is a blog that I put up last year that is a roundup of summer items. So specifically, if you're interested in doing summertime craft shows, there are, and let me actually pull it up because there's a lot of patterns on this list. Let's see. Bum, bum, bum. Quick summer projects. So it's everything from water balloons, scrunchies, different types of scrunchies, because some scrunchies take longer than others, icicle pop covers, coffee cozies, bottle cozies, can koozies, Coasters, different types of coasters are on there. A water bottle holders, hanging plant holders with chunky yarn. Those are big because they're not going to take as long. Lip balm crochet holders. Frisbees, super cool pattern for frisbees, just using cotton yarn. Little pouches for things. There's a crossover pouch that's really cool that's on here. Face scrubbies and kitchen scrubbies that you can use bulky yarn for. And actually, there's a bulky yarn at Hobby Lobby that is called, I think, Scrubology. And that would be because it's a 5 weight. So it's a bulky scrubby yarn, and it would be perfect for some of these scrubby kitchen scrubby patterns that I've got listed on this list. There's a bathroom crochet bundle. I have my little pocket worry cat pattern on there, which you can put just in a little bowl. Those are great for kids. You could sell those for a couple bucks because they're so small and they're just a little pocket cat that they can put in there. I think that's it here. Most of these patterns are paid, but if you don't want to pay for these patterns, you can get ideas from them, make your own version, or look for free patterns that are making similar things. So this is, let's see, I think we've got at least 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 14, 28 patterns in that pattern roundup. So check that out if you're going to do, like a summer show. And there's other things like my Mariner crossbody bag has been a big one for people. It does take a little bit longer, but you could make a mini version. You can make mini purses. It could still be a crossbody, but a smaller version of that. And again, using chunky yarn can make a big difference, which was what I did. Now, the second idea that I can give you is my own pattern bundle. So this, and I'll actually put this in the comments too. I call this my Ultimate Craft Show Bundle. These are the 5, is it 5? I think it's 5. 5 patterns that made up my craft show table when I was dug in, when I did a craft show every single weekend from the end of October to Christmas. And these were the only products, save for maybe 1 or 2 additional ones, that I would bring to my shows. So you get my super chunky cowl pattern, my headband pattern, my cat cozy bundle, my fingerless gloves, my pom-pom hat, and I think that's the 5. So headband, hat, gloves, cowl, and my cat cozy bundle. And then if you wanted more, now these are larger items, I brought some of my meditation shawls, which were much larger, and I would bring cat ear hats. So those were the 7 items that I would bring regularly. But that's the craft show bundle that you can purchase, but then you can also check out the roundups. I need to do another summer roundup because there's so many cool quick summer patterns that you can make. And I need to put bees on there. I need to do an amigurumi roundup for sure. I've already got a bunch of patterns ready. I just need to put it up there. And you can do things like bucket hats too. I know those take a little bit longer, but that's another option. Okay, the comments are just going, and I just missed all of them. So let me check the comments out. Welcome, Kareen. Hello. Just Make a Knit. I've always struggled with shows. I'm fine teaching at events, but fairs are usually a little too people-y for me. Exactly. And that's why I said sometimes it really depends on the show. And that's why I think even attending the shows in person. And I think there were certain shows that I looked forward to every year because the crowd that came were just so supportive and excited, easy to talk to. I never felt like anyone was looking down at my work. They loved the work that I did. They would buy a bunch of my stuff. So you'll find those shows that like you don't ever want to not get invited back to the show, you know? So it gets exciting when you start looking into it, especially if you live somewhere that does have some options for shows. And finding other makers like you that you can connect with, and you know, you might even start throwing your own pop-up events if that's something you're interested in. If you have a bunch of makers in your circle that are more kind of your people, you guys could throw your own pop-up event. And we saw a lot of that in Atlanta, of smaller indie designers being the ones to put together the pop-up events. So that's something to think about as well. Thorn, I'm thinking about turning some of my small pixel art charts into dollies, coasters, little bags. Yes, those are all great ideas. And yes, Sindra, that was what I shared. So a pattern bundle for craft shows, more for the fall, since I didn't do a lot of summer craft shows. Just making it, I meant that fairs allow a lot of people into a booth that is a small space. Yes, teaching allows me to stay behind a table or choose the amount of space between me and everyone. And that is something to think about when you're setting up your craft show table. So there are a lot of people who do want that barrier, and you can still create it. So one of the ways that I used to do that is when I had a big square and I had a tent, I had an 8-foot table and a 6-foot table. And I would actually place the 8-foot table in front of me and the 6-foot table coming out. And I would leave myself a little sliver of space behind the 8-foot table that had space for like a chair and my drink and all of that. And I still had to talk to people across the table. I did not ever really create the U shape where I had to be right in front of someone and I couldn't have that personal space barrier. So that's something that you can think about if you decide to do a craft show where you have more space, is how you set that up to make yourself feel more comfortable. Okay, so having a plan for inventory, we've talked about that a little bit. Practice setting up at home. There were a few times that I did this. Once I bought my table, I would practice setting my table up at home just to see what worked best, where things would go, so you don't feel super frustrated the day of trying to get all of your stuff to look right on your table. You can practice doing that at home. If you don't want to use a table, some people like to purchase stacking items like stacking shelves, things like that, but you can actually mark off your space. If they tell you you're going to have a 6 by 6 foot space, you can actually mark that out on your floor, out in your driveway. I have actually set up my pop-up tent out in the driveway and set my tables up to just try to see what I like best. So that's something that you can do. And it makes you feel more confident the day of, because you know what you're going to do. You know what your setup's going to be like. And that always changes as your inventory changes and as the shows that you go to change. Your table setup is going to change. It's going to grow. You're going to purchase more things for your table to make it easier for you to get organized. That's a really great thing too. And we'll have to, again, we have to do a whole separate video about being successful at the actual show, because we can't even get into all of that, because there are a lot more tips that I could share about transport and organization and things like that. So we'll definitely do another video talking about craft show success. We'll probably do we'll do videos in between. So maybe next week we'll talk about something different. And then the week after we'll do another craft show session, because I don't want you guys to get burnt out. If you already sell at shows and none of this is new for you, I don't want you to feel like the next 4 videos are going to be repeat. But I hope this is helpful right now. Okay, so this is great, Jamie. If you're still on here talking about needing someone to help you, that's actually one of my big key points is, if you have someone that's willing to help you, bring them, let them come and help you. I had that a few times, and it's not just about having someone to help you at the booth with actually selling stuff, or even watching your stuff if you have to go to the bathroom, which is a big deal. Most of the time people want to help each other. You know, most of the people at craft shows are very kind from what I've experienced. If you ask them to watch your table while you go get something to eat or while you go to the bathroom, they're very understanding and will ask the same of you. So bringing a friend is not just for that. It's just for support. It's just to feel emotionally supportive of, if you just get a little overwhelmed, or if you get bored, or if You know, the people that are coming to that show are not people that you feel like you can just chat it up with. You have someone that you can talk to and joke with, and, you know, make sure that you keep your energy on a positive side. So I think having someone come with you to a craft show, it's super helpful. I know it can't always happen. But even if it's family, if you have your mom or your kid, if they want to come, or your partner, or if you have a niece or a nephew or a best friend, anyone that likes hanging out with you anyway, you can see if they're free and see if they want to come, or even if they just want to show up for part of the show. I've had people do that where they'll come, check the show out, sit with me at my booth for a while. I can go get something to eat. They can, you know, talk to people. That can feel very good, especially if they come like towards the middle of the show. So if you're already feeling like, oh, this is a lot, and then they show up and it kind of puts you back in a good mood, because, you know, just seeing a familiar face can be very helpful. Let's see. Okay. Jess says, so glad to catch this live. I'm so glad you got to catch the live. It's fantastic. I'm just so happy to have you guys here. Emma says, I've seen Pokemon butt coasters like the cat butts. That's super smart. The lip balm crochet holders. Yes, exactly. There's also, so this is why I need to do a new summer crochet option, because there are super cute like lighter holders. So people, like for festivals and things, you can do lighter holders that have like little mushroom caps, or have little, you know, keychain holders for their lighters, but that kind of very small items that you don't have to do too much packaging to. I have a pattern for like friendship rings that you make with embroidery floss, but they're just super, super simple, so they don't take very much time at all. So those kinds of things are great for not even just summer craft shows. It can be fall and winter craft shows as well, depending on what the item is. Cat butt magnets, reusable water balloons. Yes, that is on the summer blog roundup that's in the description. Jess, good idea, Evelyn. I tend to have an involuntary fainting response to lots of people moving around or spinny things, so creating a bit of a barrier sounds great. Definitely. I never know when it'll happen. The reason that several people have said I need to rebrand to fainting goat fibers. Oh, that's actually, that's pretty good. That's pretty good, actually. Okay, so let's see. I do have some more notes, so let me make sure I get through everything. Remember that a bad show doesn't mean that shows in general aren't going to work for you. Very important to remember, and that goes back to finding the right shows for you, for your products. You don't want to feel like you have to change your products for every show you go to. You want to find the shows that work for the things that you already make and the things that you want to make. You don't want to have to make things just for the show. That leads to burnout. That leads to resentment. Of I don't even want to make this stuff, but it's all that's going to sell. Look for another show. Don't force yourself to go to these shows if you're having to make things that you hate. That goes back to mental health and making sure that we're doing the things that we want to do. And in some cases, this may mean driving. So once you get a few shows under your belt, if you hear from someone that says, hey, I know of this show, it's a little ways off. I actually went to a show in Athens, Georgia, which was a little over an hour. It was pushing into the 2-hour range if I had hit any traffic. But it was a 2-day show, and I had heard such good things about your work is going to do fantastic at this show. People like to spend money at this show. It's one of the biggest shows in the area that they have, and so everybody comes to it. So having those conversations with people who do a larger circuit and deciding if it's worth venturing out and trying a show that's a little further away, you can do that as well. And that's a good one to also bring a friend. If you can bring a friend, it is a trip, so that's helpful to have someone with you if you're having to travel like that. Okay, got some more notes, a few more notes. We talked about this already. Having a variety of items, but not overwhelming people. So this is a little bit about trial and error. You know, you have to bring maybe a few more items of a selection just to see what people are going to like. And then from there, you can start to narrow it down. I remember selling scrunchies. And for me, they never really sold well. So that was something that I ended up booting, and I didn't sell them anymore. But that made more time for me to make more of the items that were selling, like the coffee cozies, which sold really well. So I could take the time that I was spending making other things that weren't really moving to make more variety. So I had a lot more color combinations. I had both the beer cats and the coffee cats, and people had more that they could flip through to find the color that they wanted. I had more time to focus on that, and I made more money doing that because they actually sold. So some of the great benefits of going to shows, we talked about this a little bit already, is the opportunity to connect and make new connections that are local. Because I feel like with COVID, it's changed a lot of things for people. You know, most of us were making more connections online, which is great, but you really can't beat having local friends, local connections, local makers, people that you can connect with locally. And I feel like that's something that craft shows provide. So there have been times where maybe I didn't have a very good show, but I made a new friend, and that's awesome. You know, they can start sharing their ideas. You can go to shows together. I would have craft show buddies where we would request to have tables next to each other. And that was another thing, because I didn't have a lot of people that were able to go to shows with me. That was not really an option for me. I think I had 1 or 2 shows where I had someone who actually came with me and stayed for the whole show. And that's out of 2 years of going every single weekend. But it was almost just as good if I had a friend that was also vending at the show, and we could request a table next to each other, and then we could provide that support. If the show slowed down, we could spend some time just chatting together. You know, it was really nice. So making those connections with other makers can be very helpful. It can open the door for new opportunities. There were a lot of times when I would meet people who were also selling their stuff in stores, and I could get advice from them about how to get my foot in the door. They might provide me with an email address of someone that I could contact that I never would have gotten otherwise. I remember someone actually coming up to my booth saying, I own a local store and I love your stuff. Are you, do you do wholesale? So there are people who are going to discover you at shows that you might not even realize, that would be an opportunity. And then, of course, getting feedback on your items. So this is a double-edged sword. You never know when this is going to be a good thing or a bad thing. So I remember when I first started doing shows, I was using a pattern for my hats that I had come up with myself. And I did have some people who said, man, I like this hat, but it's going to give me a headache. So the band was a little too tight. So I would do, I think, double crochet or half double crochet. And then the band, I did single crochet because I wanted it to actually stay on your head, but it was too tight. And I never would have known that until someone said, hey, I love this hat, but it's going to give me a headache, so I can't buy it. So I had to revamp my hat pattern to make sure that not only was it going to be comfortable, but that it was also going to fit a wide range of sizes. And that's where I came up with the hat that is in my pattern bundle. The way that I mix the stitches up, it makes it stretchy enough to fit larger heads, but it also fits very comfortably on people who have smaller heads. So it works really, really well. And if their head is smaller, it might be a little slouchier, but it fits really nicely. And that took time, and it took me listening to what people were telling me at the craft shows. I had a lot of people who would say, I love your cowls, but I get really claustrophobic and I don't want something that close around my neck. So that meant I wanted to make sure that I always had an option for infinity style scarves where people could wear them long around their neck, or if they wrapped them twice, there was space. It was not right up against their face. So for me, the cowl was more utility because it really did cover from wind shear. So if you were out in the cold wind, you could put this up over your face and wrap your jacket around it. But there are some people who can't have stuff around their face or around their neck like that, makes them uncomfortable. So the infinity scarves provide a little bit of warmth and they look really nice, but they're not going to be up around your neck. So I made sure to always have those options so that people could choose. Same thing with my headbands. I started doing a chain foundation. I think it's what it's called, where you do the chain and your first row in one to make sure that one side of the headband wasn't tighter than the other. Now, for my pattern bundle, it's just a regular chain because they're super, super simple, but you can easily make that change. So you can decide you can do a half double or a foundation chain versus a regular chain. But it's just listening to the feedback and making those updates on what people are saying can be very helpful. Okay, let's see. Sindra said, Fainting Goat Fibers is an awesome name. It really is. I mean, that's very catchy, and you've got such a good story with that. I think it's a great idea. Cameron says, I'm already curious. Sounds like a winner to me for Fainting Goat Fibers. Thanks, Sindra. One of my YouTube friends suggested it when I said I was like a fainting goat to my reaction to too much stimuli. Yep. Giving it some serious thought. I think all of us are telling you to give it some serious thought. That's a good one. I can already imagine a logo. I mean, I can see all of the branding in my head there. Let's see. Sindra says, here's my problem. I only have 2 towns that are not considered El Paso area. The next closest town is Las Cruces, New Mexico, 45 minutes away, and I'm not going to Mexico. So I do have to say, living in Atlanta kind of skewed my opinion on how far is too far, because everything was an hour away. So, I mean, if I were going to drive from my house south of Atlanta into Atlanta for a show, I had to be ready for a 50 to 60 minute drive. If I hit any kind of traffic, it was going to be longer. So for me, driving an hour for a show was nothing, because that was pretty normal, especially if I had to go north. So if I was going north of Atlanta, it'd be a little over an hour. So yeah, I did not have the luxury of super, super close shows. Even the local shows that I would say where I didn't have to drive into the city, I could just go to one of our local churches, still like 30 minutes away, because nothing was super close, you know. So that's something to think about, you know. I know with gas prices right now, you have to think a little bit harder about it though. So I understand there. You have to make sure, and you have to do your homework. So we'll have to talk about this too. The next one that I do about crochet, about craft shows, we'll talk about breaking it down. Once you've made that decision, what are the things that you can do to be successful at the show and to actually be financially successful? And we can break down some of the different costs involved, and what you really have to think about, because sometimes you forget about things like, if gas prices are as high as they are now, that might affect whether or not a show is financially successful. So that's something to think about. Oh, and farmers markets are good too. Yes, Jess brought up a really, really good point. Farmers markets can be really, really good places to reach out and ask. We actually have one very local to me that I've thought maybe, because it's outdoor, if they do it once it gets cooler, doesn't have to be freezing cold, but once it cools off a little bit, I might see if I can get a table to vend some of the stuff that I made for shows 2 years ago that I never got to sell. Emma says, my sister went to Mexico for her honeymoon last week. I thought she would come back pregnant, but she came back with COVID. Oh no, Emma, that's awful. Well, I hope she's okay. I know some of the people who are getting COVID, it's not as bad right now. So I hope she's okay. But I hope they had a good time, you know. So Jess asks, do you have a farmer's market where you could have a booth or some events that would be local rather than limiting yourself to vending strictly? And that's kind of the point too, is looking for other options. Are there pop-up events that you can look into? Are there farmers markets? Are there art in the park kind of walks? Are there things that are a little smaller scale that you can look into? Are there any organizations or nonprofits in your area that work with makers and artisans that you can connect with to see if they have any events happening? You never know. You never know. You just got to dig sometimes. Like I said, look on Facebook events. See if there's any local events on Facebook that pop up that are different from what you're seeing in other areas. Again, Eventbrite is a good one for smaller things. Cinder says we had a couple of farmers markets around. I checked into it before COVID, but not since to see which one survived. Yes, I would definitely look into it. And yes, Jess made a good point. They usually have much cheaper booth fees for farmers markets. Jess says in our area, we've also seen signs for people having art and craft sales, just like you'd post for a thrift sale set up in their garage. I have seen that too, especially in neighborhoods. I've seen some artsy neighborhoods where they'll all set up their art stuff on their lawns. And I don't know if it's something where if you reach out, you can get in on and, you know, and do that. She loved it till she got ill. Yeah. Well, I hope she gets better quickly. Cindra, I don't mind going to Las Cruces, but anywhere else is a multiple hour drive. Yep. Albuquerque, it's 4 hours. Yeah, I wouldn't drive 4 hours for a show. I mean, I've seen people do it. There was someone who came to a show in Atlanta from California. So I was like, man, I hope you sold out of everything because that's a lot. I hope there was more reason for coming to Atlanta than just the craft show, because that's hotels, that's parking, that's everything. And it wasn't a cheap show. So, Knit, Pearl, and Squirrel, Granny D is here. Hello. Just got here in time to say hello and goodbye, eh? Yes, you did, but I'm so glad you joined. Love my finishing needles. Yes, so Granny D got some of our flexible tapestry needles. If you guys have not tried them out, they are fantastic for jumbo yarn that is very hard to slip through the end of the needle. So the needle, I'll show you guys before I go so you guys can see. So this is what they look like. They are a blunt tip needle. Now they don't have like a super sharp tip, but when you're using bulky yarn, you don't really need a super sharp tip. But the end, so this is the end, whoop, is flexible. So you're able to open that up and slip your yarn right through it, and the whole needle is flexible. So if you don't have a lot of space left, you can actually just bend your needle and push that through there, and it's not going to poke holes in anything if you're traveling with it. So super helpful. These are in our Etsy shop if you want to check them out. But I'm so glad you like them, Granny D. That's fantastic. Jess says we have an art crawl event where you drive to all the artist studios in the fall when the leaves are in full color. Maybe there's something like that. Yeah, so there are a lot of options, and it's really just taking the time to research what's right for you. The good news is you can start small. When you start into the craft show world, you don't immediately have to book yourself out and do shows every single weekend. If you have some inventory that you're already creating, you can try going to a smaller show, get some feedback on your work, make some new connections, and see if it's something that you want to keep doing. And I know a lot of it depends on where you live and how supportive they are of the arts and of the maker community and of purchasing handmade. That makes a big difference. So it's sometimes dependent on that. And that's where I am now. So moving from Atlanta back to smaller town, Alabama, there's most likely, unless I go to a show in an affluent neighborhood on a different side of Birmingham, I'm probably not going to make the type of money or be able to price my items the way that I did in Atlanta. So that's something to think about. And that makes you have to think about the type of inventory that you're creating, the type of yarn that you're purchasing for items, as to the people that are going to be buying them from you. So I hope this was helpful. I think we did, let's see. I need to remember what I wrote down, because I think next week we'll take a break from Craft Show Talk and we'll talk about something else. If you guys have anything specific you want me to cover next week, please pop that in the comments before I go. And I can start creating a running list of fun topics that we can discuss on Tuesdays. But definitely the week after next, we'll revisit craft shows, and we'll start doing a few of those every other week as we prep, because it's getting close to that craft show season. A lot of them are around the holidays, so we can kind of get you guys prepared. I am trying to, I haven't even started on it yet, but it's like one of those big goals of mine. I want to make a craft show success handbook. So that's something I've been thinking about a lot. I have my pattern writers handbook that has been very successful and very helpful to a lot of people. So this is something I've thought about. It would just be an ebook kind of PDF download. But I want to walk through all of this, everything from what we just talked about of deciding if it's the right move for you, to how to find craft shows in your area, to then how to be successful at the craft shows. I think that would be really good, and lots of checklists. I did include my craft show checklist. So if you have decided to start doing craft shows, or if you just need a little more help organizing, I have a free checklist in the description that you can click on. It was a blog post that I did a while back. The blog post goes into a lot of detail, but then there's a downloadable version of the list that you can use for your craft shows, where you can just check things off. And that's everything that you'll need at the show, and lots of ideas. And then the blog post talks about why I included a lot of that stuff. All right, I don't see any topics. So if you have a topic, be sure to pop that in there, because it's definitely time for me to hop off. But if you are not in the Facebook group, be sure to join the Facebook group. There's a link in the description to join. That's where I share, once I post these and they're scheduled, I'll share them to the Facebook group. I get feedback from you guys after the videos, and I get, feedback and ideas for new things to talk about. But yes, I hope you guys had a great time. This Friday, Pink Sheep and Friends is back. I will be interviewing Laura of Slipped Stitch Studio on Instagram. So you can pop in for that chat if you would like. She is the one who has lots of funny memes and graphics on her Instagram feed that always have me laughing. I'm always sharing them in my stories. She also is trying to figure out what she's going to do with her business, which I thought was really interesting. She's in a very, very transitional phase with her business. And I think that, it's something that we could all benefit from hearing what that's like when you've been doing the same thing for 15 years. And you have to completely change course and tell that to your customers, and deal with trying to communicate things when you're in a difficult space. So I'm very interested to bring her on and chat about where she's at and what her journey has been like. So if you want to join, that's this Friday on my Instagram feed, 12 p.m. Central Time. And if you do not have Instagram, I always post it to my YouTube channel, and you can always watch the playlist. So you can go to my YouTube channel, look at the playlists, find the Pink Sheep and Friends playlist, and you can watch all of those past interviews, make some new friends, discover some new people in the fiber community. It's a fun one to binge watch if you don't have anything to listen to or watch while you are crocheting. That's a good one. So, all right. Thank you guys. Be sure to hit thumbs up. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't. And I will see you guys next time. Until then, happy hooking!